What are the three key fantasy football questions surrounding the Carolina Panthers as they go into training camp 2022? It's time to break it out right now, right here, as we finish another week of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. The NBA is in the spotlight right now, so check out any of the NBA draft coverage. We have great stuff all around on the network, our local experts, as well as our flagship shows there on NBA here on the Locked On Network, as well as some good work at SportingNews.com. They're looking at the draft fallout and early fantasy there for NBA. Here on Locked On Fantasy Football, we're going to take the moment here as the teams are breaking before training camp to examine the key questions for another team. And today's team, as we go to our second team in the NFC South, we're going to get to all 32 teams. The Carolina Panthers are in the spotlight here to close this week of shows. So we got through the entire NFC East and NFC North. So if you missed any of those 8 shows, they're up, as well as our first breakdown of an NFC South team in this series, the Atlanta Falcons. So check it out there for you on the feed if you missed any episodes. But here, we're going to focus on the Carolina Panthers. So they have some key questions that we want to try to find answers to. We'll get more clarity on that in training camp in the preseason when we see players in action in this new offense led by Ben McAdoo. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We are free and available to you on all platforms. All right, let's dive right in. And as we've done, we've looked at the 3 key situations. So we look at quarterback there, then we look at running back, and then some aspect of the pass game, looking at the wide receivers and tight ends. So we always like to start at quarterback. And the biggest question is, who will start for the Panthers in this offense for Ben McAdoo taking over in week 1? So right now, the heavy favorite is Sam Darnold. He's at a pretty good camp for them in the mini version of it. And training camp, they expect him to settle in nicely. This is a quarterback-friendly offense. We know why people go to Ben McAdoo. It's to contain passing games instead of going for the downfield, aggressive, make mistakes with the big arm type passing game. This is a West Coast style, get the ball out quickly, rhythmic passing game. We saw it, in fact, actually for the Giants with Eli Manning, where they were in the Kevin Gilbride offense and throwing downfield, and then they made the pivot there to McAdoo to get Eli Manning to be more efficient. That's what they're trying to do with Sam Darnold here in the middle of his career. He has a career crisis here, but there's a couple things to watch out for. You also have P.J. Walker as your third stringer here. He's got the history with Matt Rule there from last year. And then you have Matt Corral, their draft pick that you can look at. I thought he was in play for an earlier pick, either in the first or second round, if he had not gotten hurt with his ankle injury there at the end of his time at Ole Miss. He's a little bit undersized, but good skill set, good athleticism, aggressive downfield arm. So maybe a little bit different the way they rein it in this offense with McAdoo. But Corral, I don't think he's going to get a fair shake to really win this job. I think they see him more as a developmental quarterback. If they saw more of his competition, they would have drafted him the way that Kenny Pickett or even Desmond Ridder were drafted there by the Steelers and Falcons, respectively. We talk about Ridder and having a decent chance there because his skill set is similar to Marcus Mariota. Now, with Darnold and Corral, they're very different. Corral is an athlete. Darnold is pretty much a pocket passer. I know what you're going to say. You're going to talk about his rushing touchdowns. They were an anomaly last year all the way through that Texans game on Thursday night. Everyone was talking about him running the way that Cam Newton did in the end zone. But we know that's not Sam Darnold's suit. They want to train him again from the one guy that was a big arm in the wrong systems to reining it in here, getting the ball out quickly, and taking advantage of having some very good offensive skill players. So Darnold should be considered a heavy favorite to start at quarterback for this new offense. Matt Corral's there. Walker's just going to be a backup, a veteran guy with experience with Corral being a rookie here with no Teddy Bridgewater in the mix. But the wild card here is Baker Mayfield. Do the Panthers go and make that move? There's also secondary level of that. Could they go after Jimmy Garoppolo here? They're committed to Sam Darnold worth the money for one more year. I think they would bring Baker Mayfield into this mix to compete if he was cheap, and that's the biggest holdup here with the trade from the Browns. They need to eat his salary. Everyone knows they want to get rid of him. They don't want to carry that salary with the Deshaun Watson contract they had, even if Watson gets significant suspension here. And it's not like Mayfield is going to be a contingency plan. Jacoby Brissett is going to be the guy in Cleveland when and if Watson misses time, which is the expectation there. So Mayfield, that bridge has been burned by the Browns there to bring him back. So you look at him, he's on the roster for now. He could just sit there as an unhappy guy that sits out the entire year, or the Browns can say, we need to move on, not just for the money. If we eat some of the money, it's okay, but so that we're not having the specter here of our former selves and seeing what it could have been with Mayfield if Watson has to miss a lot of time here. So I expect him to be moved. I think the Seahawks are also in play with Drew Lock as their starting quarterback right now and Geno Smith being their other option. You really look at the Seahawks having to make aggressive play at some point. So I think it comes down to what team can provide the decent compensation for the Browns and also how much the Browns are going to pick up the tab. So leading to that, Mayfield could still very well be a Panther come training camp and be in an open competition with Darnold, the same draft class there with Josh Allen and Josh Rosen and Lamar Jackson. So they could have a battle here in that draft class and see who starts. And there's an indication that Mayfield may actually fit what they want to do better. I think that's been the talk here, that Mayfield doesn't exactly fit what the Seahawks want to do. And there's a talk that maybe they pick up Mayfield and they ship Darnold to Seattle. Remember, there's a USC connection there and Pete Carroll. So there's all these things that still could happen here with the Panthers. But right now, in their current form, you would say Sam Darnold is going to be the starter. And you look at Mayfield, if he becomes an option, I think you're going to turn to him quickly because if Panthers feel that way and they need to acquire him, and you remember, he's to get the ball quickly, play off the play action, use the running game to his advantage. That's where Baker does his best work. We saw that with Kevin Stefanski in that offense. I think they just wanted a higher ceiling, and Watson provided that. Well, Baker provides a pretty solid floor in that type of offense. So if they're going after, there's a good chance that he can displace Darnold. He's had the better recent play and really better overall play when you look at their career. So very interesting question when it comes to the Ben McAdoo offense against status quo. I don't think Corral has a shot. It's going to be Darnold. You bring in Mayfield, I would lean immediately to Mayfield getting that starting gig. All right, there's a look at the quarterback key question for the Panthers as we break down their fantasy football prospects here at a training camp and try to read into them and what could happen here in the preseason. We'll get to our key running back question, our key wide receiver question here in our next two segments. Before I tell you that, I told you at the top that we have great NBA team coverage. Well, we have that in the NFL as well. It may be a little quieter now, but if you want to catch up on what your favorite teams are doing and just on the league as a whole with our scouting experts, Locked On NFL, so much good news, notes, analysis out there here on the network. So really proud to be a part of it here adjacent with fantasy football. And again, it's all in the same basket in terms of understanding NFL, what are the biggest storylines, where teams are going. And we want a lot of teams to have offensive success on this show to think about it for fantasy football. But check it out. Your favorite show, we've got you covered here, there with your team. And we got fantasy football. We got Locked On NFL. Just a lot of good stuff here that you need to check out. And a good time while we have a little less volume here for the NFL to kind of set it up and get your subscriptions going here for the Locked On NFL and Locked On Team by Team podcasts in 2022. All right, we will continue the show here in a moment, but first, I got to tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, which are now in the Stanley Cup Finals. There, the Avalanche about to wrap it up with the Lightning and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net becomes and remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, it is time to continue the show, and we're looking at the Carolina Panthers, answering the three key questions as best as we can in terms of fantasy football with this team. Christian McCaffrey, we know when Christian McCaffrey is healthy, he's a stud RB1. It's all about him staying healthy. Now, the next level of that is who is going to help back him up and be the best value here. And why we have to ask this question is that the situation has kind of changed behind McCaffrey. Chuba Hubbard is still listed number 2 on the depth chart. He's had his moments there and had some value, but he's had one good year. Mike Davis is a little bit better in replacing McCaffrey. Hubbard was a bit disappointing at times last year, trying to plug and play and get that production. He was a bit touchdown dependent there to get McCaffrey like fill-in numbers to even be passable as an RB2. So what do? They go out and get Donta Foreman. This is not an insignificant move for the Panthers because remember Foreman and Dontrell Hilliard, they were forming quite a force there, replacing Derrick Henry, who had the foot issue down the stretch for Tennessee. So Donta Foreman kind of rejuvenated himself, former star Texas running back. He had time with the Texans, but really came through well in fantasy last year if you needed someone to step up. And it was a bit of a twist over Dontrell Hilliard for the most part behind Henry. So Foreman has that top handcuff experience that he just had. He had a workhorse in Tennessee. Hubbard is a pretty good pass catcher, but I think he's a limited swing guy overall, while Foreman can be a good red zone guy and punch it in. So I have to tell you, it doesn't look good here for one guy to replace CMC if he goes down. I think you can get some value with Hubbard and Foreman. They more spread out, not in RB2 ways, but in more deep leagues as flex plays here. I just think they're going to share the work in situations, and that means Hubbard, again, more receiver here in those situations and has explosive plays. Foreman is more straight up power back. So I figure that's why they did, because I think there were some Hubbard physical limitations last year. They also have a got to watch Spencer Brown, a running back out of UAB. They could also pick up someone, but going back to McCaffrey, we just can't trust him to be healthy right now. We need to have a contingency plan. So Hubbard and Foreman both have value. I'm not sure that I would bang the table to make sure I get Hubbard as a handcuff for McCaffrey, but I would lean toward him a little bit over Foreman. It's pretty close, and I would not discount this being a battle in training camp where they decide, okay, who's in the best next guy up that we can put in for McCaffrey. Again, it could just come down to the early downs with Foreman and the red zone usage, and then Hubbard being more the later down guy, the swing guy with some explosive plays and the receiving skills there. So with McCaffrey, what are the chances he stays healthy? This is a tough one. I mean, he's had a lot of work. I think it caught up to him early. He's not big back here. That's been part of it, but soft tissue injuries, everything is kind of piled up with McCaffrey here. He shut himself down. So there's definitely a concern, and that's why I'm not going to invest too high of a pick on him. And if you do, and when I say too high of a pick, you're still going to take him in the first round, but you need to hedge your bets a little bit. So I think there's a lot of appeal with different guys. We talked about Jonathan Taylor and Dalvin Cook. It's going to be an interesting decision, Henry versus CMC. Who, when healthy, is better? I think right now you got to go with Henry because he's a bigger back that can come back from the injury a little bit better than McCaffrey. So something to watch for sure. But you have to have a strong backup plan. I think the Panthers realize that they need another body besides Hubbard because he couldn't be the full-time guy, plug and play the way Davis was for McCaffrey a couple of years ago. So you have Foreman. So unfortunately, I think the question is, how do they replace McCaffrey? Who's a handcuff for McCaffrey? I think it's going to be a committee approach here to do so situationally in 2022. Again, McCaffrey, this is going to be pretty critical here. I think he has to stay on the field and be somewhat productive. I think if the same goes there for Saquon Barkley, we talked about him with the Giants when we broke them down here, that this is pretty key. And so you got to look at, can these guys put it all together and be healthy, and we're going to monitor their conditioning and all that. And then you have to see where the replacement options here, and if they change. And that definitely is the case with Barkley and McCaffrey this year. Now, our wide receiver question is a little bit more intriguing and not tied to health here and looking at the handcuffs. So we'll get to that in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Before we do that, I got to tell you, really check out all the great podcasts here on the network. We have some great sponsors as well. We talked about BetOnline earlier in the show. BetOnline, Rock Auto, Blue Nile, and Built Bar. These are our classic sponsors here that we're really just happy that are on board with the show here. And all throughout the network, you'll find information you need to know about all these fine places to get in on the action, whether it's getting on the betting action or getting that much needed special jewelry for that someone special in your life, or just need an auto part, or just need to pick me up with a protein bar, we've got you covered with the best deal. So check us out there on the Locked On Fantasy Football feed there, wherever you get your podcasts. And also make sure you check out what our sponsors do. They do a great job for us to support the show and bring it to you every week and every day that we can here, all throughout the season and off season. All right, it is time to close the show here, looking at our final and third key question surrounding the Panthers offense here for fantasy football in 2022. We're going to focus on one receiver here, DJ Moore. And the question is, what is DJ Moore's floor, and how does that compare to his ceiling in this offense, regardless of who's the starting quarterback? Right now, leaning toward Darnold. So we talked about a little bit Robbie Anderson. Didn't work out where Darnold and Anderson had that good reunion as former Jets here. Anderson was pouting, was trying to get his role back. He had Terrace Marshall Jr. had some promise out of LSU, but he couldn't stay healthy. You also have now Rashard Higgins in the mix, the former Brown, Brandon Zylstra, Shi Smith, Andre Roberts. We know he's going to be more of a return guy for this team. And you also have Charleston Rambo in the mix. So looking at this offense, it should be a lot of McCaffrey out of the backfield catching passes when he's not there. Hubbard. I could also see the tight end, the versatile Tommy Tremble, getting a few touches and a little bit more, maybe more 12 personnel with McAdoo and trying to be short and immediate, get the ball quickly. I think DJ Moore can have a big year, and here's why. Moore's a guy that can make a lot of things happen after the catch. He's quick to do that. He can also stretch the field and make big plays. I think he's just one of the more underrated reality receivers in the NFL. I think in fantasy we're well aware of what he can do, but I think his floor is pretty high. I think his floor is actually as a wide receiver too, and he has some wide receiver one upside just because he could dominate the volume. I mean, we'll see how Marshall returns for action. We'll see if Higgins can carve himself a big role. We'll see Anderson kind of just going through the motions here on this team as kind of a lame duck receiver, maybe not as interested. DJ Moore is a gamer. He's been very prolific going back to his time at Maryland. That's why he was the first round pick of this team. There's a little bit of that Steve Smith moxie there for him. So I think that's also very appealing here with DJ Moore. But look, DJ Moore, I just love this kid. I mean, I've had him on my fantasy teams a few times, and he's just a guy that you look at, and all of a sudden your numbers are pretty good. And he seems to get it done either with volume or big plays. Last year, look at the numbers, very consistent there from last year to 2020, 1193 yards in 2020, 1157 last year, but the receptions went up to 93. Really, it's uncanny. It's 1175, 1193, 1157. Those are his receiving yardage totals of the last 3 years. What are his touchdown totals? 4, 4, and 4. I think that's the one thing that keeps him from really going to the next level. He's also got a few rushing yards, 40, 22, and 48 yards. He actually ran more as a rookie when he was under 1,000 yards, been consistent 1,100 yards. So what we want is those receptions to be up. He also can average high level of catch. I mean, he still had 1,193 yards on the season where he had 66 catches. That was actually his second highest total. He had 87 catches in 2019, 93 in 2021. So it hasn't been a big touchdown score. That's been the disappointment, but half-point PPR is there. So his floor is still pretty high. Look at those consistent numbers here. He knows his role in the offense overall. And he's pretty durable. He doesn't miss too much time here for this team. Again, has that versatility, make big plays, but also can do some damage after the catch. It has to go up here. I think he clearly is the number one. Let's get the ball in his hands quite a bit here. Switched to number 2 last year, so a little bit confident in his ability. So probably sneaky that he's had 3 1,100-yard seasons. And again, the teams would be nice. If he can even bump that up to 8, you're looking at another 24 points in fantasy, which is pretty big here. That's another 240 yards. And then you're looking at a 1,300-yard receiver there. So now if he can bump it up to 1,300 or 1,400 yards and get that touchdown bump, then he's going to be really special as a wide receiver one borderline here. So I really like DJ Moore. I think he proved that he can get it done with any quarterback. You look at those numbers, that says the case for sure, as the Panthers have had a revolving door between Cam Newton, Teddy Bridgewater, and Sam Darnold. So that inspires you as well, that if it's Baker Mayfield coming in there, then it's going to stay pretty high up there. And I think that Moore is more Baker Mayfield's type of receiver. He's going to scheme himself open. So part possession receiver can get open underneath, but also stretch the field. I think the biggest concern is the catch rate. It's gone down the last couple of years, 55.9, 57.1. So if you get to bump up that catch rate, we had massive targets last year, 163. So if you can use that target rate to bump up his catch rate into the 65 range, it's going to naturally bump up his yards to like 1,400 and give you more chances to score. So make sure that catch rate is high in the red zone here for Carolina. But Robbie Anderson, again, I think he's fading. I think he's been just a guy. He has some big playability, but that hasn't been rekindled here as much with Darnold. And DJ Moore is just a good all-around receiver. I just like him. He fits that profile as a number one. And the key for him is getting involved and staying in that 5 to 6 catches per game there and getting those consistent targets so he can always produce 75 or 80 yards and then add scores here and there to bump it when he's not having as big of a yardage day. But you want to see him make sure he gets 75 to 80 yards, kind of build from that and get into higher numbers there. So really like DJ Moore. Again, regardless of the quarterback, he seems to be quarterback proof. Now we just want to see him be used more in the red zone. I think that'll be the case here. Again, I think he's underutilized in that sense, and he can also take short passes the distance here. So if you get a little bit more consistency there and efficiency, I think you'll see DJ Moore live it up to a borderline wide receiver 2-1 here in 2022. All right, there you have it. There's a breakdown of the 3 key fantasy football questions surrounding the Carolina Panthers as they go into training camp here in 2022. That means our next team up would have to be the New Orleans Saints as we go through the entire NFC South. We'll get to all 32 teams, so we've already knocked down 10 for you. So we got 22 to go here, and we'll get to all of them before training camp starts here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Don't you worry about that. We'll cut into a lot of teams next week there. So looking forward to that and trying to set the table here for what we can expect from all these teams fantasy football wise in 2022. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you there as we continue our look at team-by-team previews with the New Orleans Saints.